The train hissed to a stop in the sleepy town of Oakridge, its final exhale drifting into the spring air as passengers gathered their belongings. Jasmine Carter stepped off the platform with a cautious kind of hope clinging to her. She had journeyed for 3 weeks, carrying a single worn trunk and a heart full of letters. Letters from a man named Douglas Wright, who'd written with such tenderness that she believed, perhaps foolishly, that she was walking into the beginning of a new life. Dressed in a powder blue dress with a matching hat she'd carefully saved up. For Jasmine scanned the crowd until her eyes landed on a man holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. His face shifted the moment he saw her. The color drained from his cheeks. The bouquet drooped. "You're Jasmine Carter?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost as if he regretted saying it aloud. "You didn't mention that you were," he trailed off, swallowing his words. Jasmine raised her chin slightly, trying to meet this moment with dignity. "Black," she finished for him. "No, I didn't. And you never asked." Around them, the crowd began to slow, curious glances thrown their way as the tension thickened. Douglas took a step back, clearly unnerved by the public nature of the encounter. I imagined something different." He mumbled, "You wrote so well, so proper." I didn't think. He didn't have to finish. Jasmine already knew. She had seen it in countless eyes before, surprise melting into fear, then morphing into rejection. She clutched the strap of her handbag a little tighter as he looked around nervously, trying to assess who might be watching. "You have to understand," he said, lowering his voice. "The people here, they're not like in the city. My store, my clients." This would be hard to explain. Jasmine blinked slowly, her gaze steady. "And I suppose you're the one who has to explain me?" she asked softly. His hand went into his coat pocket and he pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. "This should help cover your way back. You're clearly educated. You'll land on your feet." The gesture, however wrapped in politeness, stung, not because of the money, but because of the dismissal. In that moment, Jasmine felt her dreams unravel, thread by thread, the hope for belonging, for love, for a life built on mutual respect. Before she could respond, another voice sliced through the growing silence, firm and unmistakably confident. "Is that how you solve problems, right? With crumpled money and cowardice?" The voice belonged to a tall man stepping out from the crowd, his stance wide and his tone controlled. Garrett Lawson. Even Jasmine, unfamiliar with Oakridge, recognized the weight in his presence. Dressed in earth-toned clothes that suggested wealth worn casually, Garrett's tanned face and sharp eyes spoke of someone who had earned everything the hard way. Douglas stammered at his approach. "Garrett, this doesn't concern you," he said, but the tremble in his voice betrayed the truth. "It very much did. It concerns me when I see a man I've done business with for over a decade shrink in fear in front of a woman he once claimed to admire." Garrett replied. Then he turned to Jasmine, offering a small but sincere nod. "Miss Carter, I'm Garrett Lawson. I own the property just north of here. I know this is sudden, but I'd be honored if you'd allow me to offer you temporary lodging. My home has space, and my housekeeper always complains it's too quiet. You need time to decide your next move, and you shouldn't have to do it alone or in shame." Douglas blanched. "Garrett, you can't be serious. What will the town say?" Garrett tilted his head with a smirk. "The same town that buys my crops and depends on my land. I'm curious myself." Jasmine looked between the two men, the choice suddenly clear. One offered rejection in the name of appearances. The other offered dignity without condition. Though her trust had been bruised by years of experience, something about Garrett's presence, his unshaken composure, his refusal to flinch, made her pause. She gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," she said. "I'll accept your offer." And just like that, the direction of her life shifted. Not because a man chose her, but because she chose not to shrink. The townspeople on the platform watched in stunned silence as Jasmine walked past Douglas without another word, her trunk rolling behind her and her spine straight as a flagpole. The atmosphere in Oakridge Town Hall was electric, thick with tension and tightly held whispers. Every seat was taken with townspeople lining the walls and spilling into the corridors, murmuring speculation about why Mayor Jennings had called a last-minute emergency meeting. At the front, the long oak table where town officials normally dozed through zoning debates now felt like the front line of a battlefield. Douglas Wright sat rigid, his jaw tight, and knuckles white-flanked by several members of the so-called Founding Families Committee. When the doors creaked open and Jasmine Carter stepped into the chamber, every eye turned. She moved with the calm precision of someone who knew she belonged there because she did. Behind her followed Garrett Lawson and a silver-haired attorney in a navy suit whose quiet confidence only added to the unease in the room. "Thank you for the invitation." Jasmine began, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the hall like a gavel strike. "Although I must correct a misunderstanding. I am not here today as a guest of Mr. Lawson, but as the legal representative of a matter that deeply concerns every citizen of Oakridge." That opening line hit like a thunderclap. Douglas let out a sharp laugh, hoping to cut through the growing anxiety. "Legal representative. What are you talking about? You have no standing here. You're not even from this town." Jasmine calmly opened the briefcase she had carried with her. "Actually, Mr. Wright, I am. My name is Jasmine Carter, great-granddaughter of Samuel Green, and I have come to reclaim what was his." She pulled out aged but well-preserved papers, handing them to the town clerk, who passed them on to the mayor and legal counsel. Gasps rippled through the audience as the documents were reviewed. Land grants signed by the governor in 1866, tax receipts from the 1870s maps with clearly marked boundaries over 300 acres, including the land where Douglas's hardware store now stood. "This is absurd," Douglas snapped, rising from his chair. These documents could have come from a museum gift shop. They're fake fabricated to stir up trouble. But before he could continue, Jasmine's attorney stepped forward. "My name is Jeffrey Martin. I represent the Carter estate. These documents have been verified by the State Historical Records Commission. They are authentic. In fact," he added, holding up a sealed letter, "an official lawsuit has already been filed. The town is being notified out of courtesy before it becomes a matter for higher courts." The room erupted into shouting hands, waving voices clashing with disbelief and panic. Jasmine didn't flinch. Mayor Jennings called for order, pounding his gavel until the hall settled again. Douglas, now visibly sweating, tried to recover. Even if this fantasy were true, he sputtered. "What does she want? Money. Our homes. Does she want to tear everything down to get even?" All eyes turned back to Jasmine, who stood with her hands resting gently on the table in front of her. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want your homes. I don't want revenge. What I want is justice that lifts us all." She took a breath. "I propose the establishment of the Green Foundation, a community trust funded by recovered assets and state grants focused on education for underprivileged youth and affordable housing initiatives right here in Oakridge. Let Samuel Green's legacy be one that builds, not divides." There was silence. For a moment, it was as if the very air had been drawn from the room. Reverend Thompson, a long-time community elder, finally stood. His voice trembled. "My father used to whisper stories about Samuel Green, about how he was run out of this town without a single charge, just fear and jealousy. We called it legend, but we were wrong. Miss Carter is right. We cannot undo the past, but we can choose to correct it." One by one, others began to nod. A few hung their heads, but Douglas remained frozen, his face flushed with disbelief and something deeper, shame. "You planned this," he muttered almost to himself. "This whole thing was a setup from the start." Jasmine turned to him, her gaze calm but firm. "I came here for a new beginning. You made it a reckoning." As the town council moved to deliberate, Jasmine stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. Children played across the street near the old oak tree, unaware of the history being rewritten just beyond their laughter. Garrett joined her quiet. "At first, you could have destroyed him, you know," he said. "Finally. Taken everything." Jasmine looked out at the town, the one that had rejected her, now forced to reckon with the truth of its foundations. I don't want to become what they feared. I want to become what they never imagined, a woman who rebuilds what hate tried to erase. In that moment, it was clear the legal bombshell Jasmine had just dropped wasn't about power. It was about legacy, and the real rebuilding of Oakridge had just begun. In the months that followed the historic town hall meeting, the face of Oakridge began to change, not with fireworks or upheaval, but with quiet, deliberate acts of restoration. Where once tension and suspicion festered, new conversations took root. The Green Foundation, named in honor of Samuel Green, was officially launched with support from state grants, private donors, and contributions from families who perhaps for the first time acknowledged their inherited privilege. The foundation's first act was symbolic and bold, transforming Douglas Wright's former hardware store into the town's very first public library. The same building that once sold tools now lent books. The same space where Jasmine Carter was once dismissed now welcomed schoolchildren, researchers, and elders alike. Laughter replaced whispers, and learning replaced legacy walls built on exclusion. Jasmine did not sit at the top of the foundation as its sole benefactor, though she easily could have. She turned down suggestions to name buildings after her or to draw a salary from the fund. Instead, she surrounded herself with a diverse board: young teachers, retired, civil servants, local ministers, even a few former skeptics who had come to respect her purpose. If this is to last, she explained, it cannot be built on one person's shoulders. It must belong to the people. Her days were filled with planning meetings, student interviews, program launches, and town events, but her nights were often spent in the Lawson Estate's library, organizing and cataloging the archives with care. She had made a promise not just to right a legal wrong, but to preserve a history that had nearly been erased. Healing, Jasmine knew, wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about revealing it fully and honestly, then choosing how to grow from its truths. The Green Foundation launched Roots and Realities, an educational program that brought local history into Oakridge schools with lessons drawn from land deeds, oral histories, and cultural records long left in storage. They hosted storytelling nights, invited descendants of displaced families to share their stories, and created scholarships specifically for students studying social justice law and public history. Jasmine stood on stage at the ribbon cutting of the new library and told the crowd, "We are not just opening doors to books, we are opening doors to truth. And with that truth comes the power to become something better than what we were." Her quiet strength did not go unnoticed beyond Oakridge news of the case spread throughout the state and then the country. Universities reached out to Jasmine, asking her to speak not just about legal restitution, but about the moral architecture of healing a community. Her speeches were never fiery or grandiose. They were calm, precise, and deeply human reminders that justice could be served without bitterness and that legacy could be reclaimed without destruction. She spoke about land, yes, but also about dignity, memory, and the long, unfinished work of reconciliation. She became a voice for restorative justice, not only in Oakridge, but in dozens of towns grappling with similar buried histories. Garrett Lawson often stood in the back of those crowded halls, watching Jasmine deliver each speech with the same humility and resolve she had shown since the day they met. He would later say that the most remarkable thing about Jasmine was not her intelligence nor her courage. It was her refusal to harden in the face of hate. She never wanted revenge, he once told a journalist. She wanted balance, and that's what makes her dangerous to people like Douglas. Because they can't comprehend power that doesn't seek to punish. Jasmine's rise was not meteoric. It was rooted, deep, strong, and unshakable. By year's end, Oakridge had become a case study in peaceful civic transformation. The town hosted its first community day, where families of all backgrounds came together to plant trees, paint murals, and participate in dialogues about inclusion and equity. The old town square, once dominated by statues of settler families, now included a modest bronze plaque in memory of Samuel Green, accompanied by an interactive display telling the full story of Oakridge's founding. Jasmine visited it often, not as a leader checking on her work, but as a granddaughter paying her respects. As she stood there one breezy autumn afternoon, watching a group of students read aloud from the display, she smiled softly. She had not burned the town down. She had rebuilt it word by word, truth by truth, and the roots she planted were already beginning to grow. The day Jasmine Carter married Garrett Lawson, the sky over Oakridge bloomed with soft golden light, as though even nature had chosen to bless the occasion. It wasn't a grand affair. There were no press photographers, no celebrity guests, just neighbors. Former skeptics turned allies and children who had once sat cross-legged at her feet, listening to stories about truth, courage, and history. The ceremony took place in the rose garden behind the mansion, now officially renamed Green Lawson Hall. What had once been a private estate, symbolizing old wealth and tradition, was now a cultural center, open to all, filled with art exhibits, historical archives, and learning spaces. Jasmine walked down the aisle not as a woman claiming victory, but as someone anchoring a new chapter, one built not on bitterness, but belonging. Their marriage was never about headlines or symbolism, yet it carried both. For Oakridge, it signified a quiet revolution. Garrett, a man once considered the town's most eligible bachelor and its most traditional landowner, had chosen to stand beside a woman who had been rejected in full view of the town just a year prior. And Jasmine, who had arrived at the train station weary and humiliated, now stood in the same community as a teacher leader and loved partner. Together they transformed Green Lawson Hall into more than a building. It became a sanctuary of remembrance and equity, where people gathered not just to reflect on the past, but to reimagine the future. Programs blossomed: free literacy classes for seniors, restorative justice circles for youth, and workshops where descendants of displaced families found their voices in storytelling. In the center of Oakridge's once divided town square, a modest bronze monument was erected. It didn't bear Jasmine's name or Garrett's. Instead, it honored Samuel Green, the freedman whose land had once covered most of the town. The inscription was short but powerful: "To those whose names were buried, whose stories were stolen, may this ground now remember." There was no ceremony when it was unveiled, only a quiet unveiling on a Tuesday afternoon when school children walked by and asked their teachers, "Who was he?" And in that question, Jasmine saw the real purpose of everything she had fought for: not glory, but curiosity; not vengeance, but memory. Samuel Green's name would not vanish again. It would live in the questions, in the lessons, in the stories told beside the monument where once only silence stood. As the seasons turned and the town continued to evolve, Jasmine often sat on the wraparound porch of Green Lawson Hall in the early evenings. From there she could see the children running across the garden, lawns, the families leaving the library with bags full of books, and teenagers biking to weekend classes about civic leadership and local history. Oakridge no longer felt like a town built on stolen promises. It felt like a place learning how to live with honesty. In those moments of quiet observation, Jasmine understood that true victory hadn't come the day the lawsuit was won, or even the day Douglas Wright left town in shame. It came in the healing that followed, in the inclusive joy, in the fact that no one asked where she belonged anymore, because she simply did. Douglas Wright's name still surfaced now and then, whispered by those who remembered the lawsuit or who had once stood by him. But over time, even those murmurs faded into irrelevance. He had relocated to another town, taken up work as a clerk, and disappeared from the narrative he had once tried to control. Jasmine never once spoke ill of him in public, nor encouraged others to. Her silence on the matter was its own kind of mercy. "We don't build stronger communities by keeping score," she once told a local reporter. "We build them by keeping promises." And with every scholarship granted, every history lesson corrected, and every child given a place to speak, Jasmine kept her promises, not just to Samuel Green, but to herself. Years later, during a gathering at Green Lawson Hall to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the foundation, an elderly teacher from a neighboring town approached Jasmine with tears in her eyes. "You've changed the way we see justice," she said, "not as punishment, but as restoration." That night, as Jasmine and Garrett stood together watching the stars stretch across the quiet Oakridge sky, she felt a peace deeper than celebration. She had not come to destroy. She had come to build, and she had built something that would last, not just a library or a foundation or even a marriage, but a legacy of dignity and belonging. One that would echo for generations, not with fanfare, but with grace. If stories like this moved you, stories about justice reclaimed not through revenge, but through wisdom, grace, and truth, then, deep inside, HQ is where you belong. We uncover hidden narratives, amplify forgotten voices, and bring light to places where silence once ruled. Subscribe to our channel to be part of a community that believes dignity is louder than hate and legacy is built through action. Share this story, leave a comment, and let's keep rewriting history, not to erase the past, but to build a better future together.